Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee for the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees. At this time, I'll conduct a roll call attendance to determine if a quorum is present. Please clearly respond present when your name is called. Robbie Luda. Karina Edmonds.
Present.
Richard Humphrey. Neil Kerwin.
Present.
Christopher Bowe.
Present.
Tim Del Judas.
Here.
Margot Cook. Mike McNally.
Present.
Mark Parline.
Present.
Quorum is present. I'll call the meeting to order. Just a reminder to all members, please clearly identify yourself whenever you make a motion or second a motion for the minutes. First order of business is acceptance of the agenda. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees accept the agenda for the meeting of September 23rd, 2021?
I move Neil Kerwin. Mike McNally, second.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion to accept the agenda for the meeting of September 23rd, 2021 is approved. The next item on the agenda is item 2, approval of the minutes of our April 22nd, 2021 meeting of the committee. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee for the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees approve the meeting minutes of April 22nd, 2021 meeting of the committee?
I move Neil Kerwin.
Is there a second to the motion?
Mike McNally, I'll second.
Any discussion on that motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion to approve the minutes of April 22nd, 2021 has been approved. Meeting of the committee is approved. The next item of the agenda is item 3, discussion items. We have 3 discussion items today. I'll ask Abby to take us through those discussion items.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Robbie. Today, we're having a follow-up presentation on the IT risk assessment that our Office of Enterprise Risk Management has been conducting with ITS, our ITS department. And Carol Larson is here to report to you now on the next steps, which is how we're going to treat the risks that she identified in the previous efforts, which she reported on in June. Kara?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again today. So just as a brief reminder of what we discussed at the June meeting, the IT risk assessment process that I conducted with the 8 different groups that make up ITS to identify what they, in their experience and expertise, think are some of the biggest risks facing the university with respect to information technology, broke down into these various themes. There's an issue of aging physical infrastructure. There, of course, is the cyber security issue that plagues every organization, it seems, in the world today, with cyber attacks such as hacking and phishing and ransomware potential threats. Data security is always an organizational risk. How do we keep all of our data, particularly sensitive data, how do we keep it secure and not disclosed where it shouldn't be disclosed? Carlos then talked about an issue with digital identities and some plans that IT had regarding how to minimize multiple digital identities within our network that folks may have. We also identified that there are issues surrounding having a central and distributed resources model that should be addressed in terms of making it a more formal structure or making some decisions around how to manage the central and distributed resources. Of course, as every organization, every division within URI would also indicate, staffing and funding levels is another area that presents risk to the organization. And finally, the last theme that we identified was policies and procedures, and the fact that we need better policies and procedures and better documentation around our information technology. So with that reminder of the themes, we then had a follow-up meeting. I met with Carlos and Mike Calfane, who was the Chief Information Security Officer. And Mike Calfane had presented some ideas for proposed treatment plans based on the risks. So as I described in one of my very first appearances with this committee, generally about enterprise risk management, that you look at risk through various perspectives, different lenses, and how their impacts impact different categories of risk. And so right now, I've grouped the risks that came out through the IT risk assessment process into primarily these kinds of categories. There are operational hazard risks, risks to reputation, which involves, which are strategic risks. Obviously, a lot of the risks implicate compliance and legal issues. And then on every risk, there's financial impact should something occur. So those are the risk categories that we've identified as primarily implicated by our IT risk. So finally, where we are is we are starting to explore IT risk treatment. And these are the primary risk controls that Mike Calfane identified for Carlos and myself. And then there are plans that I will then discuss in a little bit more detail surrounding each of these. An asset inventory, which is asset management and inventory is a critical function for every organization and needs to be done for URI. The university needs to address unauthorized assets. There are lots of pieces of hardware and software that gain access to our network, and they're not adequately policed. And we need an active discovery tool and to actively manage the software on the network. And so how do we put those controls in place? How do we treat the risk?
Kara, if I could just elaborate on that for 1 second. When you say establish and maintain a detailed asset inventory, this is specifically IT assets that she's addressing. Because I don't want the committee to think that the university does not have a detailed asset inventory. One of the problems we have is that a lot of the equipment falls under the threshold of $5,000 in value. And $5,000 in value is the cutoff for where we're tracking, we're tagging the inventory, we're keeping, because it would be literally prohibitively expensive. However, we've decided that with IT assets in particular, because there are security risks attendant upon them, that we do have to keep track of them. We have to know who's got which laptop, and we have to know that the security software is on it, and we have to know it's on our domain, and so on and so forth. So what we've been doing recently is inventorying all those assets because our capital accounting process doesn't require them to be recorded, but our IT security needs do.
Exactly right. And so things like servers are already included in the asset property inventory for the university because they do go up that threshold. But everyone's laptop is not. But the laptop is actually your biggest risk from a cybersecurity standpoint. And so managing and inventorying those assets is a critical piece of protecting the security of the university. So the first implementation plan that's been proposed is asset management. As I said, that is a critical function for any university. And some of the features of an asset management plan specific to our IT resources is not only inventorying all of the assets, but creating a profile for each asset. In other words, what is the mission of that asset? What's the role in the environment? Where is it located? What's the service location? When does the warranty end? When does its support contract end? When does it become an end-of-life liability? So these are things that would be part of an inventory of the assets. Then other parts of an asset management plan would include identifying the roles and responsibilities of the different groups, asset owners, asset custodians, and users. Acceptable use of assets. We recently adopted an acceptable use policy for IT. This inventory is both hardware and software related. There need to be methods to actually maintain the inventory. Is it done through manual documentation? Will there be inventory management software? Currently with the major asset inventory, meaning they over the $5,000 threshold, our property division uses handheld scanners. They mark, they put a barcode tag on every piece, and they use scanners, and it goes into a spreadsheet. Is that something that would also be used in an inventory of the other IT work, or are there other ways that you would have to do it, particularly software that would most likely be manual or an inventory software, but it would have to be manually entered because obviously if it's not physical, you can't put the barcode on it. So these are the different ways and methods that you can maintain and classify your inventory. And so those questions need to be answered. There also need to be methods in an asset management plan, and this addresses that risk control of unauthorized devices to determine if there's any unauthorized or otherwise non-compliant hardware connected to the network. That could be desktops, laptops, servers. Anecdotally, I've heard that there have been students who've bought small servers and have them in their dorm rooms and do a very complex multiplayer gaming on these servers in their dorm room, and yet they are then presenting a risk by being on our network. And mobile devices, of course, which are ubiquitous. So there needs to be a method to control what's authorized to be on the network and what's not. And there also needs to be a method for handling unstructured data. Structured data is what you would find in a spreadsheet. It's the numbers and everything that you would see. Unstructured data is your Word documents, your PDFs, your Google Docs. All of those things constitute unstructured data because it's not formulas and things like that. And so that is always a very complex task for an organization. For instance, people put PDFs up on their web pages, and when they get out of date, they don't take it down. And so you end up with a lot of old and obsolete unstructured data burdening your network, burdening the university's IT power and resources. And so the goal with asset management then is it would enable URI to retire old assets before there's any critical failure or any other incident that would create an event and damage the university. Also suggested is a more standardized process for procuring technology solutions. And some of the thoughts around that are that IT should be recommending technology solutions in a strategic manner to meet to best meet the strategic needs of the university in an environment of reduced resources. So some ways to do that are to negotiate the initial maintenance prices at the beginning, at the same time you're negotiating the equipment purchase price and not leaving that to later, so that you know the full operating cost throughout the life of that asset right up front. Also, part of that would be from the very beginning, as part of the procurement process, determining what the appropriate maintenance service level should be for the asset. based on the business risk, the type of equipment, the age of the equipment, and the equipment's relative importance to the business. So if you address these issues upfront as part of your procurement process, then you can better control the and manage the asset throughout its life cycle. They're also, throughout the life of an asset, you need to manage the maintenance contracts, and that's where you can use inventory or contract management software tools, or even a third-party service provider for inventory management services as a way to, as part of when you procure new technology, that you have these discussions, you have these plans in place to address all of these different things. The next proposed plan involves IT operations management. And this is a broad category that has a lot of different possible features to it. One is just ensuring that the institution has not only sufficient personnel, meaning that they have the knowledge, experience, and you have the right number of people working in IT, but you also have the system capacity and availability and storage capacity to achieve strategic objectives. So this is a proactive management of IT operations in order to make sure that it's all in line with the university's strategic goals. Of course, that requires intimate knowledge and understanding of the university's IT environment. So in order for all of that personnel to have that understanding, there needs to be appropriate documentation in place to indicate how all of the IT systems and assets support the associated business processes that they are being used in. In other words, an enterprise architecture needs to be created as part of IT operations management. And then this goes back to the theme of the central versus decentralized services model. Is there needs to be an engagement with representatives all across that distributed IT environment to have to create a shared and coordinated idea of a partnership, what the support structures would be, in order to meet the needs of the entire community. The next one is management of the security lifecycle of the software. And this would apply to any software, whether it's been developed in-house, whether we're hosting it, or whether we've procured it or acquired it. And so this is a way to prevent, detect, and remediate security weaknesses. And the primary method of doing this is through the updates and the patches. I mean, many of our vendors will develop and issue patches to solve problems, improve performance, and enhance the security of their product that we are using. And so there needs to be an actual organized way for the university to stay on top of these patches that our vendors make available, to test them, that they work before we implement them, and then to install them as appropriate. Right now, we do have an environment where like everyone with a laptop is expected to install the updates as they come available, and there's no management to make sure that that's being done. And when patches become available, there needs to be a process by which the university can ensure that those patches are being tested and implemented before the lack of those patches creates a vulnerability to outside invasion. Okay. And finally, accountability measures, and this is related to the management, operations management. In the thought here would be to have a formal compliance policy that addresses what the responsibilities are of users, primarily employees, regarding the use of IT assets. And we do have now a new policy on the use of appropriate use of IT assets. But the second half of that should be a policy that actually describes different sanctions for failure to comply with information security policies and procedures. So those are the ideas that are on the table right now. What we ordinarily do in enterprise risk management is work with the risk owner. In this case, the risk owner, I would assume for IT, would be our CIO, Carlos Coggers. So the idea would be to work with Carlos to develop and have him approve the appropriate treatment plans, and then he would assign the task of actually implementing the plans to various people within his organization. And so that's our next step, is to thoroughly discuss and vet the proposals, see if there's any additional treatment plans that might be available, and then work towards actual implementation. And that's that, about that. Thanks.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
They're all staffing, centered around staffing level requirements. The first one is on the operations side. Are we using any tools to manage, correlate, aggregate security events?
I'm going to have Carlos address that specific question.
Yes, we have a whole series of tools deployed that do these kinds of activities, including absolute endpoint protection, the Qualys group of products. We have the full Proofpoint suite, and we have a limited implementation of Splunk that will aggregate and notify as well out of logs. In a larger context, we're currently looking at a series of tools that will do continuous scans of both the Office 365 environment and the Google environment for any presence of any kind of PII or keywords like documents containing username and password and similar funky things on our network.
And do we feel we have the appropriate staffing levels to kind of answer the needs of these types of technology insertions, right?
No.
Okay. And then the last question is have we done a cost benefit analysis on using like a managed security service provider to augment our IT staff?
We haven't completed a full cost benefit analysis. Our previous history with like Dell SecureWorks has been a tremendous difficulty in procuring. So we're faced with this whole RFP thing, and a lot of these services present additional challenges within the context of the state of Rhode Island procurement system, because they are a pay-to-play kind of service. The same issues we encounter with purchasing other items like Amazon Web Services, where you're basically paying for use, seem to present extraordinary challenges. And so we've had limited success in those spaces with external companies. And we have had, shall we say, challenges in adopting a true total cost of ownership model within a higher ed environment, which appears to be a completely foreign concept in many areas of the university. So you need to talk about staffing, you need to talk about hardware costs, you need to talk about electric costs, you need to talk about floor space costs, you need to talk about all of these things as a bundle, right, in order to do a true TCO.
Yeah.
And we struggle with that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
We struggle mightily with that.
I was just gonna say, one of my observations is although we've got these, and this sounds awful, but disparate business functions as it pertains to security, we really don't have a way to aggregate all of those business functions so that we're uniformly managing our security posture. And I think we're minimizing the impact that this can have on the university, in terms of protecting the integrity of our infrastructure. And it could lead to many more embarrassing moments if we don't take this seriously. So I'm always going to be an advocate for making sure that we've got the appropriate staffing levels to manage all these systems. Because I'm even afraid to ask what our staffing levels are today to manage such a robust infrastructure that we have at URI. I think we'll pick this up offline.
Okay. But I would say you should know, I mean, we're an avenue for you to get help. I mean, if we have to go out to the legislature, if we have to do whatever we have to do, because for me, I think this is frightening. I mean, we read about these zero-day exploits and the rest of it. And I'm sure the DoD information you have is well protected, but what about the family financial information and the rest of it? And should that ever get out, would be pretty embarrassing if we don't have that. I would say that deserves the protection of the same level of DoD information has, but I'm sure it's not paid for. So if that's the case, we should know it, and we should make that an issue for the board to help you fix.
Yeah, I think, we are proceeding in leaps and bounds in this space. One of the things that just recently happened that wasn't part of Kara's report here is that as of, I believe, July, 10th, 11th?
11th.
Yeah, nobody gets access to our HR systems or our financial systems without either being fully authenticated into our network under domain credentials with absolute, with silence, with all the other protections that we have mandated, or is coming in through VPN, which enforces two-factor authentication and all of those protections for remote access. Part of the endpoint protection policy that was adopted by the university here on August 31st, I believe, is a mandate that all staff will do all work for the university on university-owned equipment, that equipment shall have absolute, that it shall be part of the domain, that it shall, and so on and so forth. So what we've done really with these steps is laid the policy framework by which we take what and I think one of our early conversations used the word cowboy IT architecture, is to start putting all of that cowboy IT architecture into a policy framework under control with appropriate software protections in place in order to access any of our data systems. The huge challenge for an institution of higher education remains, how do you find the appropriate balance between these activities and the innovation opportunities for a faculty member and their graduate student who needs to twiddle with the innards of the machine to produce the next great app, the innards of the machine to produce the next great chip design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And during this fall semester, we are going to be actively working through that process. We've just recently engaged with our engineering college where this is a very prevalent activity. And we're going to start figuring out how these people can coexist with people who have a full hard drive encrypted, who need their cell phone to log into their laptop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So.
And the other thing we're trying to do is I think from lack of a central plan, there are lots and lots of machines on campus that can be absolutely standard in every respect. You have small, medium, large, it's a Dell, or it's a, pick a brand, it's got this image on it, it has this security software on it. It gets, every 4 years it gets replaced, whatever those rules are. So we're working on that in my division, because my division is a perfect example of that, where we shouldn't have 26 varieties of machine, and we shouldn't have people out bargain hunting for some kind of machine at year end. We should have a standard machine that we buy, that's it. So there are lots of places, certainly in the business end of the university, where we can pretty quickly standardize that. We'll have to roll our way out of the machines we have, but we can do that. And then there has to be a different set of rules for research.
Yeah.
And that's really what Carlos is working on.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to stifle innovation by any means, because I think that's where we thrive as an institute. One of the things we can consider, even if it's a pilot, is a zero trust framework in a cloud environment, right? So we can sandbox innovative environments for development. So again, that's something we can talk about also.
Absolutely. Love to.
Second discussion item is update on sexual violence prevention training.
Yes, indeed. Kara is also going to talk briefly about this, but we just wanted to inform the committee that we have been, I think you will recall last summer, we adopted a sexual misconduct policy to conform to the new Title IX regulations that had been issued by the Department of Education. And as part of that, because there were changes to the regs, we have mandated really a short online course, but that covers what the policy says and what the correct procedures are in the event of either witnessing or being a victim of or a perpetrator of sexual misconduct. And so what we have done is our insurer provides sexual misconduct prevention training. And we have asked both students and faculty to complete that training. And Kara, if you just want to update briefly on what we're doing in that regard.
Sure. So we rolled out the mandatory training for the employees last November, and the original plan was to have all of the employees complete the online course in Brightspace before the end of the academic year. So we had originally asked to have it done by May 1st. We didn't quite get there. So we have sort of continued with that. We pull a report every Friday out of Brightspace for the current numbers, and then we provide that information. Well, recently, beginning with this academic year, we started providing each college, each dean, with just their portion of the report so that they can potentially better manage getting better compliance. So the report is current as of last Friday. We don't pull again until tomorrow. And at the current employee count as last Friday of 3,938 employees, we had 71.87% completion rate. So we still have just under 1,100 employees who need to complete the training. So 993 of those employees, just under 1,000, are within academic affairs. So that's why we are going individually to each dean with the reports so that they can continue to encourage compliance in that area.
How about the student training?
And the student training, we did a little bit of a change up in the last 2 years. The student course, which was offered to first years, and it was offered them through their URI 101 course. But the impact of that was, yes, we had very, very good completion, but it wasn't until February in the second semester that we were able to achieve a nearly 100% completion. And that was, and at that point, the completion was based on the fact that students would have a hold put on their account and they wouldn't be allowed to register for their sophomore year first semester classes until they had completed it. So that was sort of our method of delivery, and the and the consequences if for noncompliance. This year, we changed it to being done in August and with a ideal completion date of the first day of classes. And the reason we moved it earlier for the first year students is because the statistics nationally show that the first 6 to 8 weeks of the first semester are what is called the red zone. And that is when the vast majority of incidents of sexual misconduct will occur. That's based on the fact that first years, this is their first time away from home. This is a brand new environment. This is, they're starting college. There's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of temptations. There's a lot of, not really sound decision-making sometimes at parties. So we wanted to make sure that we provided this education before they really got into that red zone to hopefully gain a little better prevention. So we sent out to the whole first year class at the beginning of August with the mandate, the requirement, and asked them to complete it by September 8th. We didn't quite get there by September 8th. So we have, reminders have gone out asking them to complete it by September 20th, and that was on Monday. And we were still at just around 70% completion. So we are still continuing to work to get all of the first years to complete. The proposed consequence, like in the past, is a hold on their account, and that they would not be able to register for their second semester classes of their first year. So theoretically, that hammer does not really fall until November when they go to register, but we're still just doing it by way of encouraging and explaining, that this is really, very critical task to support the safety of the entire community. So we're still in that mode. But we're very pleased actually that with this change from the way it was before in URI 101 to now being in the August timeframe before classes start, we're actually quite pleased with the compliance we've actually gotten, because this is this is something new. But we'll get there. We'll get all the way there.
Mr. Chairman, Tim Delgidis. That originally occurred because of a change at the U.S. Department of Education mandating that the Title IX get changed across the country. A piece of that has just been struck down by court. And on the council side for Rhode Island College and CCRI, we've engaged an outside legal firm who helped us adopt the original policy or the change. And we're changing our policy again right now to comply with the court change. I just shared all of that with Ms. Boss this afternoon and we exchanged numbers with our legal counsel and whatnot. Not sure how or what that effect will have on the university, but we're making changes at the other side. So I just wanted to share that with this committee as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if I can just add to that, as I'm also the Title IX coordinator, and our new Title IX policy, sexual misconduct policy, falls under my management. The policy itself requires no change or updating it because we have taken the procedure side out of the policy. And of course, the policy doesn't get into the level of detail about what evidence is admissible or not at a hearing. So because of the way we've structured our policy development process to put procedures in a different document, it means that that new change does not mandate a need to change our policy. But even our procedures didn't go into that level of specificity on admissibility, but as a practice, in terms of the position of the Title IX office, is that we would follow the lead of the Department of Education and not apply the exclusionary rule that the regulations had put into place, but would follow the decision of the court that that is an unenforceable rule against admissibility, and we would, you know, when we go to hearing, have the hearing officer admit the evidence that, that was before the Department of Education took that position would have been inadmissible.
Is there any risk to the institution by not amending that policy?
Not the policy itself, because the policy doesn't go to that level of detail. Our policy is sound. The procedures, I'm actually in the process of updating the procedures because we've had some changes in our list of deputy Title IX coordinators and things like that. So there are going to be some modifications to the procedures document, and then that gets posted to the policies and procedures website. And while the current version of the procedures doesn't explicitly discuss that type of, you know, that level of admissibility of evidence, I think that because there's just one court decision and then the Department of Education taking a stance of non-enforcement of the regulation, that we should call it out, that we are going to follow, you know, the court decision on the basis that the Department of Education has reported that they are not going to hold anyone liable for not, you know, for following the court's precedent and not.
This is actually part of our philosophy of how we're modernizing and systematizing our policies and procedures. So we are working very hard to separate procedures from policies because that gives the policies a much longer life. So the policy is what and why, and then the procedures are how. And Kara really is the owner of the procedures that belong to this policy because it falls in her area of Title IX. So she is responsible for making sure that our procedures change as they need to. Now, if there had been a fundamental change in the way, for example, a Title IX hearing was conducted, or, you know, what the components of that were, then we might well have to change the policy. But in this case, we don't need to. It can stay where it is. And that was a deliberate approach on our part to the policies, because what we found on some existing policies was simply that with the procedures in the policy, they became outdated really fast, which just made a lot of churn. So we're trying, and this is good. I mean, it worked. So that was good.
It worked in this case. But also, the Department of Education has indicated that they do intend to issue revised regulations this coming spring that was based on 5 full days of hearings that they conducted this past June, and took additional comments on how the regulations were impacting the way schools were dealing with sexual misconduct. So I think that it would be safe to say that if and when they do that, they expect to do it by May 2022, that will require a change to the actual policy, because we do anticipate some pretty significant changes to the regulations.
Thank you. The last discussion item, if there are no additional questions. The last discussion item is the external auditor competitive procurement process for fiscal year 2022.
Yes, thanks very much. As you may recall, our contract with O'Connor and Drew, which is also the contract that Rick and CCRI have, expired actually at the end of 21, but we voted to and got permission to extend that contract. I'm sorry, it ended at the end of 2020, but we got permission to extend it through 21 and 22 because of COVID. We just felt that going out to bid in the middle of all that and the creation of the new board and everything else was really not in our best interest. But at the end of this fiscal year, that contract will come up again for renewal, and it needs to be competitively bid. And so we have really, just as a discussion item, 2 questions for you. One is, do you have any particular preferences for the kind or level of firm? And secondly, do you want to continue to bid this together with CCRI and Rick, which I imagine, I can't prove it, but I imagine has actually probably given us some buying power, certainly with a mid-level firm. I don't know if you went with one of the big 4, whether that would give you buying power, but I'm sure it does with a mid-level firm. like O'Connor and Drew. So, do you want to do that? And shall we go ahead and procure that as a group or not? Should we procure it singly? And we're really just looking for guidance from the committee on this, because in order to get that process done, we really need to start about now with the whole procurement process.
I think we discussed this at length. We had a very spirited conversation about this. And I think my concern was always if we get into any sort of lengthy contracts with these third-party external auditors, we have to have a way to measure performance. One way to keep them honest, I think we discussed, is issuing contracts that have like a base year for option years. I don't know if that's something that we're considering, but I think it'd be worthwhile to explore that type of contract construct.
I think our current contract ran longer because of COVID and so on, but the normal base year is either 3 or 5 years with some extension options. And we can certainly do that. And you're right, it does keep everybody on their toes. We have to balance that against the administrative burden of rebidding it every 3 years, which is also considerable. And also remembering that changing firms is also very expensive. Because basically you have to get the new firm in, you have to teach them, everything, and they have to learn the organization and so on. So that's a balance. And I'd be interested in the committee's input on what you think, what's an appropriate term, what's do we bid it as a group, do we bid it singly?
You know better than us what works best for the university, and I'd put a 10 in terms of if you think it makes sense to keep it all together.
I think every opportunity we have to help each other with better buying power and consolidation makes sense. I have not heard any reason not to do it in this instance, and the firm that we've used was here before I got here, and I've never seen a red flag from any of the professionals at any of the 3 institutions. And it is a very complicated audit process. So I think steady as she go and keep it that way, unless there's a reason that I'm not aware of to change course.
That's a good point.
Just a quick question. How do you guarantee whatever level of collaboration is necessary between your internal team and them? I mean, this is stuff this committee's probably covered a million times already. But your internal audit is handled in-house, is that correct?
No, we do not have an internal audit function. The state took our internal audit function to itself about, I'm going to say 5 years ago, 5 years ago. So we do not have an internal audit function. So instead, the state conducts periodic internal audits, not that frequently, as far as I'm concerned. And so what we do is with our external auditors, our controllers group works very closely with them and takes it extremely seriously. And then we pay a lot of attention to the management letter from the external auditors. What we have done recently in Kara's area, it was part of my plan about building a risk management function, is we've added a compliance officer. Now that compliance officer is not an internal auditor, but if we're concerned about the operations in a particular place, or we're concerned that things are getting sloppy, this is the kind of thing where we'll ask the compliance officer to go in and say, what's going on with this function, please just go take a look and make sure that you're not finding things either getting undone or being done incorrectly and so on. But we were specifically instructed by the state that we could not have internal auditors.
The state did that across the state, thinking they were sweeping up all the internal audit function, consolidating them into a professional group for the state, and then deploy them as necessary. Whether that worked or not, who knows?
I mean, do you have much influence over the agendas of those state level auditors?
No. They announce that they're going to audit X and they show up and audit X, but they don't show up that frequently.
I'm sure if we put our hand up, they would come.
Yes,
But-
yes.
I don't know how often anybody wants to do that.
But as you remember when we did the bylaws and the committee charters, we put internal audit, actually, a best practice is internal audit actually works for this committee, is
Right.
how it would normally work.
Right.
And we were told just the story that they just told us. And so it's something I think we should take on, but we had such a big list that this was something we kind of kicked down the road, but I think it's in our best interest because we're driving without headlights, without the ability for this committee and the board itself to have some independent entity, looking over everybody's shoulder to some extent.
And that's really what I envision for the compliance function.
Yeah,
I can't call them auditors.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
words matter in this instance,
Yes,
and a
correct.
compliance officer
Yes,
you can do whatever you want with at the university,
right.
but an internal auditor has to work for the state of Rhode Island
Yeah.
on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
so
So
what-
words matter on that.
So we've just hired our first compliance officer.
That's great.
So what I want to do is offer the committee that person, obviously
what-
needs to get up to speed, but is available to you.
Yeah.
And if there are areas of concern, that you want looked at, then it would be important to communicate with Kara and that person about what you want to look at. And so, and a little later, maybe we can add another compliance officer, and we can build that up slowly. But we have to be careful not to step on the state's toes in terms of internal audit.
Are there any additional questions, comments on that third discussion item?
Okay, so just to
Oh, sorry.
confirm, then what we'll do is we have to bid the contract.
Yeah.
Should we ask for a 3-year bid and a 5-year bid to see if there's a difference in pricing that might be of interest?
Yeah, I think I'd like to bring it to the executive committee's attention to kind of get a consensus as in a larger group.
But we can ask for prices for both,
Yeah,
and then you
absolutely.
can decide, right?
Yeah.
And also then we'll do it jointly with Rick and CCRI.
That would be I have not presented this to the council
Yeah.
yet, but it makes perfect sense.
And I'll talk to Steve and Kristen about this.
Right, and correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, welcome. The final item on today's agenda is item 4, motion to adjourn. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Move we adjourn.
Is there a second? I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor?
Yes.
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 Any opposed? It's unanimous. The next URI Board of Trustees Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee meeting is scheduled for November 4th, 2021. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, that was painless.